In part 1 of Inside My Stable with John Tapp, we learned about the deeds of multiple Group 1 winner Chariot King. In part 2, John tells us about the magnificent setup he has here at Ebenezer. John, tell us a little bit about the property, because it's a beautiful setup you do have here.
Been here now for nearly 15 years, Greg. They were cow paddocks when we purchased the place in the year 2000. We had to do a massive amount of excavation to make the track possible because of the lie of the land. We had to move 20,000 cubic metres of earth from the top end to the bottom end to raise the level necessary for the track, for the home turn actually. Bede Island, a wonderful engineer, was instrumental in drawing up the plans for me. He'd had experience with trotting tracks all over the world, including Macau many years ago. He did a lovely job. He supervised the construction, which was done by J.K. Williams, and we came up with a lovely 700 metre track with a very good camber, what they call transition turns. We decided to have big sweeping turns and shorter straights. The length of the straights really didn't matter, but we wanted them to get around these turns comfortably, and because of the transition effect and the camber, they have no trouble with the bends.
Nice soft cushioning on the track?
Yeah, that's the most important thing of all, Greg. You've got to be constantly monitoring the texture of the surface to make sure it doesn't get too hard.
And we also see you've got a swimming pool out there, a swimming hole for the horses that need it.
It's a bungee swim. I like the bungee. It makes them work a little bit harder. The old-fashioned way of swimming them up and down the pool suits a lazy horse. They only go as fast as they want to go. But the bungee means that they've got to swim on the spot, and if they don't swim, they sink.
You haven't had any problems with any sinking on you, have you?
No, I've had a couple get a bit panicky
the
first time or two. But I think it's the best way to do it, and people say to me all the time, that must cause damage to their tail. Surely it's not good for their tails. Well, I've been bungee swimming here for years now, and I've never seen one with a sore tail. Chariot King swum about 1,000 times.
How many horses can you accommodate here?
Well, I've had up, after EI, when everything had to come back in at the same time, just for a week or two, I had 24 horses here. I found one in the pantry one day. I really couldn't accommodate that many. I really didn't enjoy having that many. I very quickly trimmed, and the workable number for us, Ross Adams is with me now, and with Anne's help, of course, we can handle 12, 13, 14 fairly comfortably. Any more than that, we'd be scrambling.
Great to have good helpers in Ross and Anne.
Well, how lucky am I to have a bloke like Ross Adams? He was born into this game. It's all he's ever known. He's an expert horseman. He's very patient with them. He's very quiet around them. And I've got 2 or 3 two-year-olds here, and there's nobody better around a young one than Ross. Great work driver. Throw him on an odd one at the races. He drove the trotter very well for me one day recently, Kiara Delight. He ran second on her at Menangle, gave her every hope. And Anne, of course, well, she deserves awards on more than one front. Not only for the wonderful work she does around here, but for the fact that she has survived 35 years of marriage to me and retains her sanity.
How did you get into harness racing? I guess people will be watching this and saying, how did John Tapp, the race caller, become a horse trainer?
Well, I got into it by a freak of nature. The late Frank Kennedy rang me up one day at the 2GB studios in Sydney around about 1970. He told me that they were putting on a commentators race at the Fairfield Gymkhana, and that the original combatants were to be Frank and Ian Craig, who'd had a disagreement about trotting drivers on Punters Post Mortem on Channel 7. Ian got sick. He contracted a nasty virus. He had to pull out at the last minute, and Frank rang me up to take his place. I'd never sat behind a pacer. I had a crash course from the late Laurie Moles and another one from the late Eddie Sims. 2 quick lessons in the week leading up to the event. It had a hell of a lot of publicity, and the crowd at Fairfield Gymkhana for that charity for crippled children was something in the vicinity of 5,000 people. I'm not exaggerating. You couldn't move in the place. Out we go. We picked up a third runner, the late Des Hoisted. Somehow got in on the act, and the three of us put on a show for the crowd. I drove one of Eddie's, stood up, pinged away, led, won easily, and I was instantly besotted. And from that moment on, I was a complete convert to harness racing.
So that was in about 1970. How long did it take you before you took out your trainer's licence?
I drove in a lot of charity races over 7 or 8 years, all over Australia. I don't know how many, must have been 50 of them, everywhere, even at Globe Derby.
Really?
There were 2 there, I remember, all over the place. You name a track in New South Wales and we had a commentator's race, by which time I was firmly hooked. I took out my trainer's licence in, I think, 1979 or 1980. And my first registered drive was the big New Year's Eve meeting at Penrith. They don't have it anymore. It was a monster meeting. People had come to the trots, then go out to celebrate New Year. And my first drive was in a 2-year-old fillies race, stand start. I drew the outside fence, and I remember it well because the larrikins were giving me heaps over the fence, and I'm trying to get this filly to stand up, you know. Anyway, she flew the mark, she led, she got down to the quarter in the final lap, fell in a heap and ran last.
Oof.
Perce Hall had been telling me for weeks I wasn't working hard enough, and I said, "Oh, I'll be right, Perce, I think I've given her enough." Perce was right and I was wrong, and it's a lesson I've never forgotten.
We've seen you working Chariot King today, but you don't race drive anymore. You had a pretty nasty fall back in about 86?
86. March the 3rd, to be precise, 1986. Drove a horse called Meadow the Great, a New Zealander that I'd purchased for some owners. He drew 1, could have led had I wanted to. He was very quick off the arm. He led from 5 or 6 and won easily at Bulli a week or so earlier. But he'd had a setback, I'd missed a bit of work, and I thought I better not lead tonight, I'll hand up to something. So a horse called King of the Stars crossed me, trained by the late Ned Feely, driven by Brian Forrester. And we're coming around the home turn the first time, and down went King of the Stars, without warning. Over the top goes Meadow the Great. And I can remember thinking, I'll be right here, this is a slow motion fall, I'll just step out of this. But I hadn't counted on the horse behind me, which had been about 3 lengths back, and hit me in the middle of the back. Ooh. Shot me forward, bent my leg back underneath me and broke it in 3 places. And I landed between the hub rail and the horse, who was thrashing and kicking, and I didn't know I'd broken my leg until I went to stand up, and I tried to jump over the little hub rail, and then I just fell over.
So that was, you gave driving away after that?
9 years. I didn't have a horse for 9 years, but I always knew I'd be back.
Was it fear, or was it because of work circumstances, or?
Well, the very popular and legendary managing director of Channel 9 was a fellow called Sam Chisholm, who was extremely famous for calling a spade a spade. And one day I'm hopping up the stairs at Channel 9 on crutches to the newsroom to do something. Sam, as I'm coming up the stairs, you're looking down to make sure you're safe, and I saw 2 highly polished Italian shoes, shiny enough to see your face in them, and I looked up, and it was Sam Chisholm watching me come up the stairs on the crutches. And he said, "Get into my office." And when Sam said, "Jump," you said, "How high?" "Sit down," he said. Went round to his side of the desk, flopped into his plush leather chair. He said, "Now, we'll be giving that trotting caper away, won't we?"
That was it.
I said, "Okay." All right. At the time, I was still in a bit of pain and, uncomfortable. So it wasn't hard to make the decision, but I missed it terribly. And I learned to ride in that 9 years. My daughter was in Pony Club, so I used to go to a few riding lessons with her, and not that I ever reached any great heights, but I enjoyed it, and it somehow filled the gap, the void. Just at least having a hands-on experience with a horse, even though I wasn't driving one, it just helped a bit, helped me to get over it.
And am I right in saying it was Anne who told you to go back into harness racing?
Well, she said it in her usual feisty way one day when the atmosphere was a bit tense for some reason or another. And she said, "Listen, you are either going to get yourself another pacer or take up golf, one or the two, because you're driving me crazy."
So you got the pacer?
I got a couple of mates together and I purchased a cheapie from the South Island of New Zealand I remember his name clearly, Alias Kent. He was bred to be a trotter, funny thing, but he paced, although he might as well have trotted, and he was a non-trier. He was an absolute, the worst kind of non-trier. But he did manage to win a race at Bulli one night, thanks to a gem of a drive from a very young Josh Willick, and that was just enough to give me the incentive to have another crack at it.
So since you've made your comeback, is Chariot King the horse that you've enjoyed the most?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I've been very fortunate to have some. Loyal Deputy was a lovely old horse. He was a New Zealand purchase for the late Keith Conroy and for Lindsay Nichol, a former president at Harold Park. And he won 19 races. He ran second to the Falcon Strike in the Newcastle Mile, which, had he raced well in the Cordina Sprint, he was into the Miracle Mile that year. But he got knocked from pillar to post. Nothing went right. He ran fourth and missed the cut. But he was a lovely old horse, and the best I had prior to Chariot King. She's a Mountain Girl was a lovely old mare. Lisa Don was a beautiful Harold Park mare. So was Chill Sanction. Laserdoor. I really enjoyed training the mares. Laserdoor was a good mare. She ran third in a Ladyship Mile. And later, I think the best mare I've ever had in the place was a mare called Misty Miller. Her speed, if she got the right run, was absolutely lethal. Gosh, she was quick. She ran second in a Ladyship to Deanna Troy at Harold Park.
So is it something you'll do for the rest of your days, train horses?
Well, I think Anne's within earshot as we conclude this interview, so I'll have to answer this with a great deal of circumspection, if there's such a word. If I said, "I'm going to give this away tomorrow," she'd be half pleased. Only half, because she knows she'd be living with a crank and a narc again. But I think there's also part of her that realises that it's become very much a part of my life. I'm a great horse lover. I'm a great lover of the standard bred horse. I'm a great lover of the industry. I'm saddened and deeply hurt every time somebody kicks it in the guts. I hope we see a reduction in those circumstances in the future. But Greg, it's a drug to me. I don't know how I'm going to kick it.
It's once it gets into your body, it's very hard to get out, isn't it?
It's an absolute addiction.
Thanks very much for having us today, John.
Pleasure, mate.
This program was brought to you by Harness Racing New South Wales and the New South Wales Harness Racing Club. This has been a Harbour Television production.